8. A sense of disquiet pervaded old Dyson in his sleep. He felt as if some malevolent presence suddenly hovered over him, seeking his soul while he lay undefended. His uneasiness became so great that old Dyson started into waking. However, instead of some fiend such as had attacked the party, he looked up into Lila's perfect face. The noble woman knelt at his side. "Are you ill, my love?" she whispered. How long have you been there?" "I just returned. You look so peaceful. I did not wish to disturb you. I apologize if I did." Old Addison frowned. Now that he was awake, the disquiet magnified. Only it seemed to have something more to do with their surroundings. "Lila," he muttered, "go join the others by the fire. Go, right now." "Why?" Her eyes widened. "What is the matter?" "Just do it." Rising swiftly, old Dyson all but pushed the blonde woman toward the center of the camp. As he did, he saw to his dismay that only Mendlin was present. "Where's the Chilios?" he demanded of his brother. "Where's Sari?" "Chilios has gone hunting." Mendlin glanced about. "I believe Saranthina should be nearby. She only went to gather a bit more wood." "I'm sure that she'll be back shortly," interjected Lila, attempting to calm the tall farmer. "There's no cause for concern, old Dyson." But he felt otherwise. Something was close. Very close. There was a rustling sound from behind Mendlin. Startled, old Dyson's brother scurried toward the others. Saranthina stepped into the campsite. Old Dyson began to exhale. And then another dark-haired figure joined the trader's daughter. He was even taller than old Dyson, while slimmer, clearly very fit. The newcomer wore a kindly expression, and his manner reminded old Dyson in some ways of his father. But all that became moot as he realized just what garments the man wore. They were those of a clerk of the Temple of the Triune, a high-ranking cleric at that. "Old Dyson," Saranthina called, "I have a friend with me. His name's Malik. He wants to help." Old Dyson hid a frown. She of all people should have known how he would react to a cleric's presence, especially after the chaos in Sarum. True, Saranthina had always been something of a believer, but he had thought that behind her now. What was she thinking? "I have come to offer the protection of the Triune," Malik graciously added, spreading his gloved hands as if to show he carried no weapon. The flames of the campfire reflected brilliantly in his gaze, which fixed upon old Dyson with an almost magnetic pull. "This child has told me of the terrible injustice perpetrated on you in the name of the Cathedral of the Light. The Triune frowns on such monstrous behavior. It would keep you from the threat of the agents of the Prophet." Despite everything that had happened to him, despite his deep adherence of the Malik's ilk, old Dyson found himself half wanting to listen to the man. There was just something understanding about the cleric. He seemed to feel the pain, still buried deep in the farmer's gut. Old Dyson opened his mouth to welcome the man to their camp, but at that moment, the fire erupted, briefly bursting to a height greater than that of the cleric. Malik instinctively pulled back from the wild flames, and as he did, he also tore his gaze from old Dyson. The farmer felt as if a blanket had been torn from over his head. It was as if he had been blind and could not see again. And only then did he understand that Malik had briefly mesmerized him. "Siri!" Dyson roared, his rage immediately swelling. "Come to me! Hurry!" There was a hesitation, as if at first she either did not hear him or for some reason could not obey. Then a violent shiver. The dark-dressed woman cried out and fled from Malik's side. The cleric took a blade to grab at her, then glared at old Dyson. And no sooner had old Saranthina escaped than the camp filled with hooded and armored figures either on horseback or on foot. Old Dyson had seen their like before, seen them and been repulsed by them as he had been by the cathedral's inquisitors. Peace warders, they might call themselves, but the warriors of the train were no better than the cutthroats commanded by the unlamented brother Megilius. All they sought was control of the minds and souls of the people. Those who did not kneel to them, those like old Dyson, they found ways to condemn. In the blink of an eye, the farmer relieved the calamity in Sarum. He saw the hatred and heard once more the lies. "No," he growled at the oncoming figures. "Not again." The air rippled. As if struck by an invisible hand, the peace warders went flying back in every direction. Two crashed against the nearby trees, striking so hard that they were wrapped around the trunks like vines. Another warrior flew up several yards above the ground, disappearing into the foliage. The rest lay scattered and stunned around the outskirts of the campsite. "Impressive," declared Malik in the same fatherly voice. Unlike his minions, he stood untouched by whatever force had acted. "What you could be taught with just a little conditioning. What you could be taught." His eyes narrowed. Once more, the flames reflecting strong in them. A heavy weight all but crashed old Dyson into his hands and knees. He felt as if it would soon bury him in the hard soil. Every muscle strained, every vein pounded. His head seemed ready to explode. The farmer turned his gaze aside, but still could not break free of whatever spell the cleric cast. He saw that Medlin and Saranthina suffered worse than him, for they were already flattened against the earth. Of Lila, old Dyson could see nothing, but the thought of her also fighting to live gave him at last the impetus to push himself up on one knee. "A very strong will," the robe figure remarked. "The master will savor breaking it further." The force pushing at old Dyson amplified. This time, his face smashed into the ground. A sharp pain exploded from the bridge of his nose, and he had no doubt that it was broken, for blood already began dripping from the nostrils. "Bind him," the clerk commanded. There was scuffling of boots. Malik's servants rushing to obey. "We have no need of the others." No need of the others? With a pain-racked shout, old Dyson forced himself up into a crouch. His head pounded and his heart strained, but a sense of triumph filled him. He found himself standing before two very startled peace warders. Before the pair could recover, the son of Demetrius reached out and seized both men by the throat. His fingers barely wrapped across, yet the crackling bone was very audible. The peace warders twitched, then collapsed at his feet, their necks broken by something other than mere strength. Despite old Dyson's resurgence, Malik appeared only mildly impressed. He glanced at the fire that had broken his mesmerism, then looked again at old Dyson. This could have been handled with so much more pleasantry, my child. There's a place for you in the temple. The Primus has sensed your power and would welcome you as a son. I want nothing to do with either you or him. A short-sighted choice, my child. The future of this land, of all lands, is the temple of the Triune. Those who do not see the light shall fall forever in darkness. But darkness was all that old Dyson saw when he looked at the high priest. There was that surrounding Malik that by no manner could be harried, farmed, or linked to any noble light. In fact, Malik radiated a presence that repelled old Dyson, as nothing ever had, and he felt certain that it was the high priest's nearness that had earlier forced him to waking. The peace warders had quickly regrouped and now surrounded the area. Serenthina stood near Mandolin, who seemed lost in thought. Old Dyson finally located Lila near his left. She appeared as calm as Malik, but her calm evidently came from confidence in her lover. The noble woman's face was filled with utter trust in old Dyson's ability to save them. Strengthened by that, he looked from her to his brother and the trader's daughter before finally facing the cleric again. I said, I don't want anything to do with the temple. Leave now, or else. I truly regret the course you forced me to, my child. Malik returned, glancing past his query. That the others must suffer more than they need to because of your reluctance. It's so sad. The eyes narrowed dangerously. So sad. And entirely your doing. The peace warders moved. At the same time, several pieces of burning wood leapt out of the fire. They fell to the ground just before old Dyson, where they immediately grew longer and thicker. Flames still surrounded them, but did not appear to burn them any longer. Now several times their original size, the gathered sticks took on a new shape, a shape that mocked that of a man. 2 lengthier branches for legs, 2 shorter ones for arms, and the knob of a broken piece acting as the head. It stood as tall as the farmer, a stick figure from Nightmare. The knob turned toward Malik. Take him, the cleric dispassionately ordered. The fiery golem lunged at old Dyson, its searing arms wrapping around his own in a hold worthy of a hangman's noose. The heat was unbearable. The flames all but blinded him. He shut his eyes, but the light of the fire seemed to cut right through the lids. Old Dyson gasped for air, but all he received for his efforts was a searing sensation throughout his lungs. Yet, for all the agony, it should have been far worse. Old Dyson should have been burned to death by now. His flesh melted away, and his bones blackened. But Malik did not want him dead. Old Dyson slowly recalled. Malik wanted him pliable, a willing cover to bring before his master, the Primus. He might torture the farmer, might bring him to the edge of despair, but the high priest would not dare chance killing the one for whom he had been hunting. That knowledge turned the struggle for old Dyson, doing his utmost to push the pain from his mind. He let out a defiant roar and tore himself free of the golem's grip. There was a sudden, intense chill, followed by a great clatter. Old Dyson shook as his eyesight cleared. It was to see a pile of smoldering sticks in front of him, all that remained of Malik's creation. That was not all, though. As old Dyson looked at his scorched arms, the burned area started healing. The skin quickly turned from a horrific black and crimson to a fresh pink unmarred by even a freckle. Even his garments no longer showed any sign of smoke, much less fire. Old Dyson's pleasure at overcoming the high priest's latest trick faded as his fear for Lila and the others once again overtook him. Unprotected, they could have hardly stood against the trained and bloodthirsty peace warders, but all three were untouched. Warriors of the Triune did indeed surround them, but that was as much as the villains could manage. All else ended in futility. Old Dyson saw one blade come at his brother, only to bounce away several inches from its target. A peace warder sought to seize Achilleos, only to nearly break his hands against the very air near the hunter's neck. The same was the case for Saranthina, whose gaze at that moment caught his own. She understood, even if her attackers did not. Eyes round, Cyrus's daughter nodded in acknowledgement to old Dyson's power. And as for Lila, the noblewoman stood just behind him, also under a furious but futile onslaught of weapons by the zealous servants of the temple. She stood in their midst, her expression one of calm and expectation, and, as with Saranthina, Lila looked at old Dyson with the understanding that he would keep her from harm. It was enough to make him smile, despite the circumstances. And that smile remained in place as he focused his attention on the cause of their troubles. For the first time, Malik no longer smiled, or even acted disinterested. A frown cut across his face, and in his dark, dark eyes, old Dyson read a barely held fury. The high priest held in his gloved hands a small, jeweled box, whose lid was turned so as to open toward his oafish adversary. You bring this upon yourself. The master will have you alive. If only it is your barely beating heart I present to him, my child. He opened the box. Old Dyson instinctively flinched, only to see that the box merely contained 3 glittering gems. Despite the flickering light of the campfire and the distance between the two men, old Dyson was somehow able to identify them individually as a blue, oval stone, a gold, rectangular one, and, largest of all, a teardrop-shaped white diamond. The manner in which the gems were situated also indicated that there should have been a 4th, but that slot was empty. Do you think to bribe me into becoming a covert? He finally asked, curious. In answer, Malik ran a finger over each stone. No, I think to make you beg me to let you. Without warning, the peace warders abandoned their efforts, fleeing in the direction of the cleric. Malik paid them no mind, more interested in the open area between old Dyson and him. An area now filling with noxious smoke, unlinked to the campfire or any other source that could be seen. Old Dyson had faced mesmerism, crushing force, an animated flame. He was not afraid of smoke. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Once he was through the smoke, it would be a short distance to the cleric's throat. But from behind came an uncharacteristically shrill and worried cry from Lila. No, Lila, no, Dyson, not like that. Beware the lurkers. No sooner had she called out than a macabre shape formed just before the farmer. Old Dyson caught glimpses of razor-like appendages above what passed for 3 arms and a bulbous head that looked too heavy to be supported by any natural body. 4 glittering orbs burned a sinister ivory. The thing took a step toward old Dyson. And then, in the blink of an eye, a silver aura shone around the monstrous form. The creature raised its various appendages high and gave out a low, gasping sound, then simply faded away. But even as old Dyson was somehow relieved of that horrific adversary, two more shapes coalesced in the smoke, in their own ways more grotesque than the one that had just vanished. One was a thing whose body looked to have been freshly flayed, a body consisting of two legs ending in clawed hands, and a sinewy, spiked tail attached to a tube-like body. There was no head, just a gaping hole atop, out of which nightmarish, toothy projections snatched at the air just before old Dyson. Its hellish companion was a skeletal figure with a face of a hungry bird of prey. Two leathery vestigial wings thrust up from its shoulders. Its arms ended not in hands or claws, but in multiple suckers, and its legs were bent backward, like those of a grasshopper. From somewhere farther back, somewhere beyond the smoke, Malik uttered a single word. Lucian. The avian leapt forward with a swiftness unbelievable. 1 second it stood before old Dyson, and the next it was upon him. Even as he fell under the force of his jump, he heard a deep grinding sound from the direction of the second beast. The severed appendages sought for the human's chest and throat, and it was all old Dyson could do to prevent them from reaching their targets. With his hands, he held up the creature's horrific limbs by the wrist, shoving the upper part of the beast up as high as he could. Above the sounds of the struggle, Malik almost nonchalantly commented, "It will keep enough of you left alive, my child, for the Primus to work with. Just enough." Old Dyson tried to dismiss them the way he had the fire golem, but these were creatures more like the hunter in the forest. No, they were even more than that. Without understanding how, old Dyson was certain that the fiend he had previously destroyed had been far inferior to these vicious horrors. A long, sharp beak poised above old Dyson's head. He expected the creature to snap at him or even try to spear him in the skull, but instead it opened wide and let out a ear-piercing shriek that rattled every bone in the farmer's body, a shriek without end or even respite. It was all he could do, just to keep from passing out under the intense onslaught. Ears pounding, old Dyson finally released one of the avian's arms and went for the beak. However, as he did, the suckers dropped down across his chest. A ghastly, gnawing sensation arose wherever the creature's suckers touched, but old Dyson could not let that pain stop him any more than the previous. Straining, he seized the beak and, screaming himself, clamped it tightly shut. The avian shook its head, seeking release, even as it continued to absorb what the human could only assume his life force. Still feeling lightheaded, old Dyson attempted to shove his adversary off. Only then, though, did he realize that something now had hold of his feet, something that began dragging him, and the avian in the process, toward where he last recalled the other demon to be. Not at all wanting to know what horror the second creature offered, old Dyson doubled his struggles, but could not free himself of his initial foe. The force that had so far protected him well now failed utterly, and he could only guess that was because he had not used to wielding it for so long in such a desperate manner. Given time, old Dyson had no doubt that he could have learned how to easily overcome either abomination, but that time was now not his. He did not fear death, for, again, he knew that Malik wanted him alive. But the priest no longer cared what condition old Dyson was in otherwise. A ragged, bloody stump that still breathed apparently would suffice to please the mysterious and clearly not so compassionate Primus. The avian's vampiric suckers began to have a dilapidating effect. Old Dyson feared what would happen to the others if he failed, while his trusting face in particular burned in his memory. They would all be slaughtered, if they had not already been. He had no idea if any of the three were still protected, or, for that matter, what happened to Achilles, who had never returned from his hunt. It was likely that the archer had been first to die, slain by the Peace Warders while in the woods. A numbness began to spread from his feet up, a chilling numbness that old Dyson knew was not the result of what the avian was doing. So, both demons had him now. Surely he was done for. Lila, he murmured. Lila. His body suddenly shook, but not because of anything that this monstrous foes were doing. A tremendous, glorious strength filled the son of Demedes. In an instant, he felt not only refreshed, but more powerful than ever before. The combined might of the two creatures seemed so utterly insignificant now. It made old Dyson laugh that he had been so worried about being defeated by the likes of them. Invigorated, old Dyson tightened his grip on the first demon's beak. This time, though, he had no intention of merely trying to turn it to the side. One squeeze was all it took to crush the beak. The demon let out a garbled sound and sought to rip itself free. Dark green ichor flowed from its shattered maw, dripping all over old Dyson. He ignored the burning caused by each rancid drop, eager to see what else he could do. The power surged through him like a roaring river, feeding him continuously. He felt his body swell. He was a giant in comparison to his foes. A titan. A god, even. Malik frowned as, not for the first time, he sensed something amiss. First, there had been the nigh instantaneous attack by the fool, just as the demons had first been materializing. Old Dyson's destruction of the razor-like pariah, the most foul of the servants given into his service by the master, had stunned the high priest more than he had led it on. He had not even sensed the farmer's power rise up. So immediate had been the results. But the other two demons had acted according to his desires, and had looked ready to make short work of the prey. Malik had kept his own heightened senses at their peak in order to make certain that the creatures did not get carried away, as demons were wont to do, and kill old Dyson. Indeed, the high priest had almost been as much part of the struggle as he had been physically involved, and that was why he, too, noticed the astounding and impossible surge of power abruptly coursing through what, a breath before, had been a flailing, lost buffoon. Noticed that surge, and could not comprehend just how it came about. It almost seemed to Malik as if it had been fed to old Dyson from another source. Tearing himself from the struggle, he glanced at the three other figures. The cleric immediately dismissed Serentina, who barely sensed the force growing within her, and the perplexed-looking fool next to the girl, whom he had determined to be old Dyson's brother. There was something peculiar about the brother, but he was not the source. Then Malik looked at the only person left, the one he had taken at first to be the least of interest to him. He looked at her very close, seeing her as only one of his skill could, seeing something that he could never have guessed that he would see. "Great Lucian!" he blurted, for once unable to maintain the appearance of complete confidence and disdain. One hand came up to the point, and the words of a spell formed on his lips. A sharp pain struck him in the back next to the left shoulder blade. Well versed in the human body and the various points of lingering or instant death, Malik's mind routinely calculated that if what had hit him, an arrow, east or mist, had gone an inch more to the center, then even his power might not have been enough to save him. As it was, he immediately set about using the gifts of his master to keep himself from not only bleeding to death, but passing out as well. Unfortunately, that meant that he could no longer maintain control over the battle or deal with the other shocking discovery. Malik teetered back, trying to maintain focus. As he turned, though, it was to witness Brother Rondo instead, falling, the peace warder slain by a bolt through the throat. The cleric caught a glimpse of a lithe figure darting along the edge of the campsite, a mere archer of all things. It insulted Malik to think that he had come close to perishing because of someone without any skills in the art whatsoever. Then, from where old Dyson struggled, there came an odd and unsettling sound. Malik at first thought that perhaps one of his creatures, now rid of his control, had torn the farmer asunder. Instead, though, old Dyson once more stood free. Worse, in his left hand he held the limp form of the beaked demon, but who now had no beak whatsoever. As the cleric watched, old Dyson tossed aside the dead monster and used both hands to seize the third demon by its thick, sticky tongue. That tongue Malik had last seen wrapped around the fool's legs, there to inflict such cold as would have frozen most mortals solid in a heartbeat. Yet, not only had old Dyson survived that cold, but now he had dragged the last of Malik's infernal minions to him. The grinding teeth of the demon clamped down upon the farmer's wrist, and for a moment the high priest thought that old Dyson had made a fatal error. Instead, the savage teeth shattered like brittle glass against the human's bare flesh. Gritting his own teeth, old Dyson pulled one hand free, then grabbed the gore-soaked piece of the beak from the first demon. Wielding the long pointed fragments as he might a dagger, old Dyson plunged them into the fleshy area just above its foe's monstrous maw. The demon squealed, then dropped in an ungainly heap. Thick black fluid coursed down over its body from the great wound. As that happened, the arrow in Malik's back, forced by his will, popped free. The cleric felt the last of his wounds still shut. Some pain remained, but most of his weakness now came from the combination of his healing and his previous efforts to control the demons. This was not how it was meant to be, Malik thought as he watched the finish of his final demon. The Primus would be enraged with him. The high priest shuddered at what form that fury might take. He particularly recalled witnessing the form his master's anger had taken against one of the previous high priests of another order. There had been not much left to dispose of afterwards. But what should have been a simple task was not. Malik could not say where things had gone awry, but he could not help feel that there had been a piece of the game that even the Primus had sensed, impossible as that should have been. Old Dyson looked up at the cleric, and spreading across the sweat-soaked countenance was an expression that reminded Malik very much of the anger of which he had thought only the Primus capable. Unmindful of his minions, Malik quickly sought to protect himself. The force that struck him and his peace warders was 100 times greater than that which had earlier thrown the warriors. This time bodies went flying as if shot from catapults. Men screamed as they collided with tree trunks. They were tumbled through the woods. One peace warder struck so hard that the oak's trunk cracked and the tree crashed into its neighbors. Only Malik remained standing, if barely. He watched in disbelief as old Dyson grimly strode toward him. There was blood in the farmer's eyes, and the cleric knew that his would-be prey intended something far worse than anything unleashed so far. And knowing that, Malik did the wisest thing he could. The dust devil whirled to life just in front of old Dyson, swiftly raising up whatever loose fragments of dirt and debris it could. The makeshift storm filled old Dyson's face momentarily, blinding him. The cleric concentrated. Old Dyson swatted away at the thick cloud, angry at himself for having not expected something of the sort. Blinded, he prepared himself for the worst, certain that Malik had a second and far more insidious attack to follow. But the dust settled almost immediately, revealing in its aftermath no sign of the high priest. The son of the Mede stood bewildered, awaiting some trick, yet Malik did not suddenly reappear and attack. Instead, slim hands took hold of him from behind, and Lila's voice declared, "You have done it, old Dyson. You saved us all from the cleric and his demons." He surveyed the scene around him, seeing only the corpses of the peace warders and the two abominations. At least 3 of the former lay with bolts through them, a sign that old Dyson had not been entirely responsible for protecting the party. Achilleos even stood at Serenthina's side, giving comfort to the traitor's daughter. "Forgive her carelessness, my love," Lila softly added. "She did not mean to endanger us." Old Dyson wanted to go to Serenthina and explain that he understood that Malik had seized control over her mind, but decided to leave the situation in the hands of the hunter. Achilles would do everything he could to see that the distraught woman calmed down. "You are amazing," the noble woman continued, breathless. "Do you see now, my love? Do you see that nothing is beyond you? That nothing could prevent you from achieving what we dream?" He had seen everything naturally, and was still awed himself by the abilities that he had displayed. A high cleric of the Triune had set spellwork, men, and monster against him, and had failed. What more could anyone fearing his existence do? Surely nothing. But they would try, and the others, especially Lila, would have to depend upon him until they, too, learned to fully awaken the force within them. "Let him come," he muttered without realizing it. "Let him come," old Dyson added, thinking of Malik. Lila came around to his side, her eyes glowing in that light of the campfire. "Old Dyson, did you hear what the clerk said? Did you hear the name?" "Name?" Tried to recall but failed. "What name?" Her lips drew close. "Lucian," he said. The cleric called out the name Lucian to the demons. She turned her gaze to Mendelin, who was just approaching. Old Dyson's brother started. You heard, did you not?" Mendelin visibly paused to regroup his thoughts, then nodded. "Yes, I heard that name from him. I did, old Dyson." Lucian. The same name that the first demon had called out to before perishing. Now Malik had used it too. Was there some connection between the temple and this Lucian? Between the Primus and this master of demons? Old Dyson felt an intense unease creep through him at the thought. Demons at the beck and call of the temple? What did it mean? And who, then, was the Primus, whose name might also be Lucian?